Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Just-in-Time Cafe. I am Elizabeth Swan, co-founder of the Just-in-Time Cafe, and I will be your moderator today. And if you have never been to the cafe before, you're in for a treat. I am excited about today's webinar, the triple win, designing work that delivers for everyone. And that is with my fabulous co-host now, Thomas Bertels. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled. So let me tell you guys a little bit about Thomas. Thomas Bertels, he is a management consultant and business transformation expert on a mission to make work more productive, valuable, meaningful, and impactful. He has more than 25 years experience helping companies across a range of industries, from startups to Fortune 5, transform how work gets done. Thinkers 360 has recognized Thomas as a top 50 thought leader in future of work and design thinking. Before starting PurposeWorks in 2021, Thomas was a founding partner of Oxygy, Valeocon. Earlier in his career, he held leadership roles at Aon Consulting, which was Rath and Strong, where he led the process improvement and design practice. Thomas started his career at AC Brown Boveri. I'm messing it up, Thomas. I'm doing you not so proud. Thomas has written several books and numerous articles on work design, process improvement, business transformation, and organizational learning. His latest book, Fixing Work, Designing Jobs Employees Love, is something that is a must-have. And I am so psyched because I have known Thomas for a lot of those 25 years, and we've worked together at a lot of these organizations. So having you still as a colleague since those years ago, we worked in Leipzig, Germany. Thomas, I'm so thrilled. I always learn from you, and it's always great to get you. So just a few housekeeping notes for everybody before we begin. You can ask questions anytime by answering them into the chat area. If they make sense to answer at the time, Thomas will take those. If not, we'll pull them into the end. There's also a Q&A section. If you put something in there, I will grab it. This session will become available for free on our website by Monday, and we generally post by Monday, if not by Tuesday. So first activity is sharing where you are from. So usually you find people from all over the world. So tell us where you are right now. So just type in the chat section, where are you joining us from today? Alyssa from Tacoma, and Kaylin from Richland, welcome. Amy in Vermont, Helen, hello, Helen. And Maria, Portland, awesome. My kata coach, Naomi, North Carolina, Lucy, hello from Maidstone, UK. Hey, we are officially international, Thomas. And then we've got Roger in Wisconsin. We got Sherry in San Diego. We've got John in Metamora. That's a new town for me. And then and Jennifer in Charlotte. Welcome, Jennifer. Awesome to see you all. I am psyched. So aside from what's happening today, let me tell you a little bit what's happening next month. And that is a very exciting webinar by Mike Osterling called Value Stream Mapping, Charting the Course, Unveiling the Power. A lot of people use value streams. They might not be completely comfortable with them, or they want to get the most out of them. So he is going to help us understand the benefits, when to use them, what makes an effective value stream mapping activity, and on some of the pitfalls. So we are very psyched to get Mike Osterling, who co-wrote the book on value stream maps. So another great author. Okay, and then the latest podcast, y'all should listen to this one. This is our interview with the fabulous Deandra Wardell and the intersection between vision, strategy, and continuous improvement. And there's a great Q&A on there about workloads getting in the way of people knowing each other. And we covered, actually, Deandra gave us a walkthrough of Basecamp, which is a project management app, if you want to get a look at that, an in-depth look. So that's what's to come, or what's out there right now. But right now we're coming back in to hear Thomas talk about fixing work, man. Let's talk about the triple win.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, so really excited to be here and share some thoughts on work design with your audience, Elizabeth. So what I thought we should cover is, first of all, what's the business case for fixing work? And then really look a little bit into the root causes, right, as process improvement professionals, right? When things are broken, they get a cause. And then we're going to go into discussion around what actually makes a good job, and also talk about the link between work design and operational excellence. And I know that many of the folks here on the call have like a lean Six Sigma process improvement background. So I think that's going to be an interesting discussion. And then we're going to go into, right, how does it actually look like? How do you identify opportunities? How do you implement work design? And lastly, right, what are some success factors that need to be in place, and how might this fail if you don't do it right? And obviously, we're going to leave time for questions at the end. And again, right, if questions come up, feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll pick them up if we can throughout. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the end. So, work is, like, everybody talks about work, right? I think since the pandemic started, that's been in the news. And I think there's a couple of things that keep coming up, right? People talk about the pandemic changed the workplace forever, right? Remote hybrid work, right? That seems like it's not going to go away, although companies try really hard to get people back into the offices, right? But that's probably not going to happen in all places. And I think the other thing we're seeing is that employees demand more and more from work, right? Whether that's purpose, whether that's compensation. Right, the pandemic really, I think, has changed a little bit what we expect. But I think it's also worthwhile thinking about this a little bit more longer term. And I think the argument I want to make is that work has been broken for a while. Why do I say that? Well, if you take the Gallup surveys, for example, right, over the last 20 years, they consistently said that less than a third of employees are engaged. So that's the equivalent of like driving in second gear on a highway, right? The engine is revving, but you're not really getting very far if 2/3 of the employees are not on board. Productivity is stagnating, right? There's also plenty of studies. We all thought that technology is going to give us a big quantum loop, but we haven't really seen that in the workplace. And lastly, a lot of change efforts actually fail, right? So a lot of the things that companies do to bring up productivity or increase engagement really haven't really hit the target yet. And this is an analogy, right? Probably many of you are familiar with, like the boiled frog, right? The story presumably is you put a frog in the water, you slowly turn up the temperature, and right, the frog doesn't know the difference and he gets boiled alive. So if you think about the workplace, I think the scenario is that actually the employees notice that the water is boiling and they jump out, and they're not going back into the boiling water, right? I think people really, I think we cross like the Rubicon when it comes to the workplace, and people, I think people's expectations have fundamentally changed. And again, there's also plenty of numbers to back that up. It's employee engagement. I talked about this. That's this is at the global level, right? 20% of people are engaged. Only a third of employees say that they feel connected to a mission, to the mission of the organization. 1 out of 3, right, complain about boredom as a reason for leaving their job. So I think there are plenty of statistics out there, and every time I'm sure everybody gets these newsletters, right, tell us 51% of employees are burnout or whatever it is. So there's plenty of evidence that not all is well in the world of work. Well, why is that? So if you think about like cause and effect, the argument, I think, is that how we structure work is really heavily influenced by what we've been doing in manufacturing since the beginning of the 19th century. Right, and we applied that also to knowledge work and office work, and what that has led to is really highly fragmented workflows. Right, so we've taken an entire job that the customer wants to get done, and we've broken that into many small bits and pieces. And we created highly specialized roles, and I'm sure you've seen that all in your organizations. That it takes 29 people to actually hire a new employee spread across many different functions. We also create, I think, too many non-mission critical activities, right? There are all these reports and so forth. If you actually think about like the core mission of, right, for example, a hiring process, which is find the right candidate and get them into the organization, right? But there are all these other things that people are expected to do, whether that's reports or analysis, or updates and so forth. And another element of like the broken work piece is that people in general don't get a lot of feedback, right? People get like an annual performance review. Maybe the manager checks in once a quarter. That's sometimes not enough. And at the same time, we also have, I think, confused accountability, right? And you can easily test that out if something goes wrong in your organization. How easy is it to pinpoint kind of like, right, what went wrong and who screwed up? And it's very difficult, right? People point left and right. And so that accountability is really diffused and nobody owns these problems. And I think at the fundamental level, I think one of the reasons why we have all of these issues is because managers don't get any training in work design. We barely train people how to be effective leaders, but we also don't give them the tools to really make smart decisions about who gets to do what and how work gets coordinated. And that's like the domain of work design. But if those are the causes, right, what are the effects? Well, one is we oftentimes get a poor customer experience, right? I try to call a call center, right? Odds are you're going to get connected to 5 different people before your issue gets resolved. Turnover, right? We've seen turnover rates double over the last 15, 20 years. And there's no sign that they're actually going to go down. Engagement scores we talked about, right? That's very low. And we also get a lot of unnecessary layers of management, right? It's not unusual in a 1,000-people organization to see 12, 13, 14 layers of management. And what that really leads to is that the people at the front line have very little decision-making power to do anything. And all that decision-making power is concentrated at the top. So the business case for fixing work, right, for addressing some of these issues, I think is in 3 main buckets. The first one we already touched on is like the employee engagement topic, right? We got high turnover, we got low levels of engagement, but there's also the organizational effectiveness piece, right? We got these fragmented workflows with way too many handoffs, right? We got a lot of bureaucracy and rules and procedures. Productivity is low, accountabilities are not clear. And oftentimes when we bring technology to bear in the workplace, it's oftentimes a little bit like aspirin. It doesn't really treat the underlying cause, but it adds another layer on top. And then lastly, the customer experience, right? From a customer perspective, people have multiple touch points. It takes a long time to get back to customers. And oftentimes also the customer doesn't see the accountability on the other end. So, right, organizations, I think, right, obviously would love to have a better customer experience, be more effective, and have more engaged employees, right? So how do we get there? The main idea behind motivational work design goes back to Frederick Herzberg, who is, one of like the grandfathers of what we now know as organizational development, who basically said, right, if you want somebody to do a good job, you got to give them a good job to do, right? And that obviously on the surface makes sense, but it's like begs the question, what makes a good job, right? And so I want to maybe turn that over to the audience and want to use menti.com to do a little survey here. So I think you can use the QR code with your smartphone, or you can go to the website under menti.com. And the question I want to put to you is, what were the characteristics of the best job you ever had in your life? What made that such a good, rewarding job? And I want to start the Menti now and really look forward to your perspective.
I'm doing it too. Figured since it's not limited, I get to join in.
Is this your response, Elizabeth? A difficult challenge?
No.
Good. Then we know that it works, right? Everybody can get to it.
All right. There's also, user issues, spelling, things like that. You don't want to be shown up spelling words wrong on a big public Menti chart, right, Thomas?
No, this will be on the internet forever. It doesn't go away. So think about the best job you ever had.
Ooh, I like this.
All right. Now we got stuff coming in. Yeah, I want to give it a few more seconds.
That's pretty smooth. I had the last mentee attempt on the cafe webinar did not go as smoothly. So you've done something right, or they've improved things, Thomas. I don't know.
I take full credit. I think I did something really, really right.
I think that's
But
the
yeah,
way to
I
go.
was a little nervous too whether this would work out, but I feel vindicated. Good. So we got 27 responses. So let's take a look. Right. 32. More coming in. Wonderful. So couple of themes, right? People say work is important, feeling the work is important. Autonomy, right? Engaging, flexible, diverse, purpose, right? Which goes to the meaning. It's difficult, but it's a difficult challenge. It's a stretch assignment. A couple of people talk about, right, the great boss, leadership, manager, pay, right? Obviously important. Trust, travel. Very good. This is very helpful. Oh, we got a few more. So again, it's like the wisdom of the crowds, right? I think the audience really, I think, identifies like the main things that make a good job. Now, the point is that actually when we make decisions about, right, how we structure work, we never really kind of look at it through this lens here, right? And say, well, gee, to what extent, right, does this give people the autonomy that they're looking for, right? Or if I were in this job, how clear would that purpose be to me, right? How clear is it what I'm contributing to the larger organization? And so, right, this topic has been researched for the last 6 decades. And again and again, the same factors keep coming up as to like what makes an intrinsically motivating job, a job worth doing, where people show up no matter what to get the work done. First one is meaningful work, right? We all want to make an impact in the universe here. And that has really like 3 elements. I think one is, right, use of different skills, right? A variety of skills. You're not just cranking, right? You're not cranking away at it. The second thing is, which I think is really important, is to do the whole job from start to finish, right? People used to call this job enlargement. Right? And the third element is that you do something that has value or delivers a benefit to the client, but there's somebody else that needs that work. The second element is, right, that also came up in the mentee, is autonomy, right? Which is really degrees of freedom to use your judgment to decide how the work gets done, when the work gets done. And the last piece is obviously feedback, right? So knowledge of the result, the ability to assess your performance. Ideally, by doing the work itself. Second best is like when the customer says you're doing a great job, right? Third best is actually when the manager says, right, well done, right? So this is the original research from Hackman and Oldham that goes back to the early 70s. And that's been validated again and again. I think since that original research happened, obviously the workplace has changed. And one of the most significant changes is really how we use technology in the workplace, right? And so that has emerged as like the fourth element of really good intrinsically motivating job, that you got tools and technology that enable you and empower you to do more versus just becoming an obstacle to get things done, right? And I'm sure people can relate to that, right? We oftentimes really deal with poorly designed technology, right? And people becomes like human middleware, right? They got to type data from one system into another system, right? Because it doesn't work. So those are like the 4 major elements of meaningful work. And the whole idea behind motivational work design is to intentionally structure work so that it delivers against these things. If you think about like work as the product, or the job as the product, right? And the employee as the customer, then, right, what are the things that people want from this product? Well, it might be a good idea to make sure that the product actually has those features. We do that when we design a product, right? We just don't do it when we design work. And again, as I said before, right, this approach is based on research, right? I didn't make this up, right? There's plenty of people have written about this. Even like more recently, Daniel Pink in his 2008 book, Drive, right, talked about, right, purpose, autonomy, mastery, right? So similar elements. This approach, I think, unlike many others, is data-driven. So we're going to talk about this in a second. But the idea is it doesn't really matter what you think as a manager makes a good job, but let's get some data around how the employee experiences the work that they're doing. So the voice of the employee. And then if you look at the implementation, which we're also going to cover, is the idea is not to just mess around like with individual jobs, but really to fundamentally rethink how the work gets done. So change the processes and the jobs at the same time. And lastly, I think it's sustainable, right? The reason why it is sustainable, because those doing the work actually need to be involved in the redesign of the work. This is not something that gets done by a couple of managers sitting in a conference room and like drawing process maps, right? It really requires, I think, people to be involved. And the analogy that I use oftentimes is like, nobody washes a rental car. In the history of rental cars, nobody has ever pulled into Hertz and said, you know, I ran it through the washer and I also vacuumed the back seat. You know, the car is clean. You can just give it to the next guy. It never happened. Why? Because it's not your car, right? You rent it for a day or 2 days, right? Well, if you look at the world of work, we kind of treat employees as if they're like renting the job, right? And really shouldn't have anything to say about like how the job is structured. So the benefits of that really is a triple win. And that I think is really interesting. This is not like a program to create happy employees by itself, although it will deliver that. It really is about at the same time creating a better customer experience and deliver more productivity. That's the idea behind the triple win. So again, we talked initially earlier about the business case, these 3 elements. So if you do this well, right, you really structure jobs to maximize the opportunity to develop people, which increases retention and engagement, and also increases the sense of ownership and responsibility, right? From an organizational perspective, you also get benefits, right? Oftentimes you need less organizational layers. You can increase the span of control. And also because employees were involved, you really increase the adaptability and scalability of work, right? Because it's not static, right? We all know that, right? It's called continuous improvement, right? What worked today is not going to work 3 or 9 years from now. So we got to have the ability to constantly refine that. That again, only happens if employees have this sense of ownership. And lastly, I think it's about retaining also the best people, right? And I think that becomes increasingly, I think, a challenge for organizations, that really the best people say, I'm in this large bureaucracy. I don't feel like I can do much here. Why don't I go to a startup, right? I do a lot of work in the biopharma space, and I've seen an exodus of really talented executives and scientists that say, I'd rather be a big fish in a small pond than like a number inside a large ocean. Right? And then lastly, the customer experience, right? Because if you redesign the work right and you create like a single point of contact, you really streamline, I think, the customer journey and you improve customer satisfaction, because hopefully they're now dealing with somebody who can actually address that problem on the first call. And so work design really, it's right aimed at the sweet spot where you get all 3 of these benefits at the same time. Well, how do you identify opportunities? Well, I already mentioned, right, a good starting point is really to understand how employees experience the job. And so we call it the Mojo Survey, Mojo for motivational job design, or putting the mojo back into work. But it basically measures how people experience the job along these dimensions. Right? Do they feel they have autonomy? How do they get feedback? What about the purpose of the work? Right? Does the work provide opportunities to grow? Do they have a sense of the company mission? And as you do that for the different roles, this really gives you a heat map that tells you where the work is most broken, right? So in this case, right, probably the underwriters need some help. But it also allows you to surgically zero in around like what is actually broken, right? Because we don't need to throw everything out with the baby out with the bathwater, as I say, although that's kind of like a cruel visual. But sometimes it's just, hey, if autonomy is the main thing that's missing, can we revisit how much autonomy people have? Right? If everything over $50 needs to get escalated, can we make this $100 or $500 or $1,000? Right? So first step is identify opportunities. The second piece, though, is to also understand the context. Right? How does this fit into the organizational strategy? How does this fit to what we're trying to accomplish from the customer experience perspective? What are truly the mission critical activities? And kind of like, right, effectiveness, efficiency, right? What's like the right balance for the organization, right? Where are the opportunities? And then lastly, and most importantly, is the organization ready for touching this? Because once you mess with people's jobs, some people look at this as kind of like the third rail, right? That's kind of like where the current is, where you get electrocuted, right? Because you start messing with the jobs, then obviously people right, might ask additional questions like, right, if you want me to take more responsibility, shouldn't I get paid more, right? And so I think a lot of managers, I think, shy away from that. And the other piece is, quite frankly, the leadership mindset, right? If the leadership doesn't believe that people show up to work to do the best they can and be part of like a winning team, but rather see them as people that are lazy and so need to be tightly controlled, otherwise they're going to mess up, this is probably not going to work, right? So you really need like a theory Y mindset versus a theory X mindset for those that have are familiar with Douglas McGregor. And the culture also, right, needs to be conducive to this. And lastly, you need some capabilities and capacity to do this, right? This is not something you can do like, right, in the last 5 minutes of the morning shift, right? This is an effort. It's a project. It's a program. It needs time and commitment. One point that I think people oftentimes raise is, but not all employees are the same, right? Right, and maybe not everybody wants like a high growth job, and that's actually true. Right, if you look in your organization, you will find people that just need a job that requires a minimum amount of emotional and intellectual attachment because they got a second job that's way more important to them. Right, so they just need to pay the bills, and they don't want a high growth, demanding job. Right, they don't want the difficult assignments. So if you have people like that, let's say a jazz musician, right, that wants to preserve his mental energy for the show in the evening, then you got to make sure that the job also, right, allows them to minimize, in that sense, their involvement. But the whole point here is it's like the square peg round hole, right? You want to make sure it matches. So if you put people that are highly motivated, they want to grow, into a poorly designed job that doesn't deliver meaningful work autonomy or feedback, right? You're not going to keep that person in the job for a really long time because they're going to find something else where they can get the growth that they're looking for, right? Similarly, right, you put somebody in a job, they don't want growth, they just want a paycheck. You make that incredibly demanding and development, right, and designed to develop them over time, also not going to help, right? Also a mismatch. So that's something to keep in mind, but the diagnostic also identifies that. Right? And the reality also is that, right, quite frankly, the vast amount of employees in an organization actually are looking for a job that allows growth and delivers meaning. So how do you do it? That's really, I think, obviously the big question everybody's interested in, right? How does this work? And what you'll find is that a lot of the steps are very close to the lean methodology, right? Streamline the process and get rid of unnecessary tasks, right? We oftentimes do that, right? We ask ourselves, does this step add value or doesn't add value, right? So that's the first step. It's a little bit like when you move into a new house, right? Don't take all the stuff that you accumulated over 30 years into the new house, right? Sort it out before you move. The second piece is, now take all these individual tasks and really pull them together into jobs or teams. Ideally, right, make the job so broad that one person can do the entire job from start to finish, or that a team can do the entire job from start to finish. The next step is create some ownership for some portion of the mission or for some portion of the client base, right? So for example, if you're like an insurance company, right, it's like maybe you create a team that's responsible for all the claims in the Western region, right? So now they have like a more complete accountability. Versus, right, it's just the next caller coming in and it doesn't matter where they're from. Ideally, you create direct client relationships, right? So you eliminate all the middlemen and really connect the people who do the work directly to the customer who benefits from that. You also want to delegate responsibility to the lowest possible level, right? Which is really empowering the teams to really own the task. In some cases, that's limited, right? So this is not like, right, now let's push everything down to the front lines. In some areas, we need controls, right? If you're in financial services, if you're like in healthcare, right? If you're changing nuclear fuel rods, right? That's not something where you say, let's give that to a empowered team that can like structure the work as they see fit. But I think in a lot of cases, we really don't give people the responsibility and accountability that they need to really feel that sense of ownership. And then importantly, might make sure that people can tell just by doing the job itself whether they're doing a good job or not. So the equivalent or the image here is, I think, is like a golfer, right? The golfer swings, hits the ball, sees where the ball lands. So now we can adjust the swing on the next time around, right? And we can course correct. The last topic is minimize switching costs and unplanned communications. That's really a reflection, I think, of the increased use of technology in the workplace. So oftentimes, right, how we coordinate work, so like in a knowledge transactional work environment, is really through email or through Slack messages, right? Somebody sends you a PowerPoint and says, hey, I need you to enter these, right? These 5 data points there, right? And that, I think, has become increasingly a distraction for people. The typical knowledge worker gets about an email every 4 minutes and probably like way more Slack messages. And so one thing we haven't really factored in, that all of these messages really serve as disruptions, right? And they really don't, they pull people away from the ability to do some deep work that allows focus. And so you see people spending half their day, right, going through the email inbox, making sure they never missed anything, right? And so there are better ways to actually structure knowledge work. And, you know, people use Kanban boards, for example, right, to create like more visual elements, right, and really get the work out of the email into some other tool or system that doesn't create constant disruptions, right? So those are some 7 implementation steps that one can take. It honestly depends on, right, what the diagnostic says is missing, right? So if people already are very empowered, have a lot of autonomy, right, that's probably, right, delegating responsibility further down might not be the most impactful thing we could do, right? But I also want to, you know, again, drive home for this audience that this has a lot in common with what like a good lean process design looks like. It just adds this additional element there where we actually look at the process map, we go inside the swim lane and say, okay, overall the process looks efficient, but how about for Joe, who is the, right, HR rep, right? Does he, looking from his perspective, would he see this work as meaningful? How do you roll this out? There's a couple of different ways, right? You can obviously start tinkering around with individual jobs, but that's oftentimes very difficult because, right, that job is dependent on the inputs they get from somebody else and needs to deliver an output for somebody else. So it really works more effectively if you look at like an entire organization, whether it's a business unit or right, a geographical office or whatever it might be. And from a timeline perspective, right, this is probably like a year's worth of work, right? There's the initial diagnosis, there's some preparation, scoping out some pilots. You don't want to do this, right, across the entire organization. You want to be surgical, right, and carve out some projects, right? You got to design the work, right? So you got to review the data, you got to get rid of the work, you got to, right, get the team up to speed, to get them trained, get them facilitated. And then you got to roll it out, right? You got to, right, train people, because oftentimes as we broaden the responsibilities, people need more training, right? We probably didn't get it, right, 100% right the first time around. So we got to like think about, right, is there some hypercare post-launch to refine this further? Like, how do we scale this up, right? Maybe we try it with one team, but then we take it to the rest of the organization. And, right, once we get to that point, right, then let's think about, right, how do we scale this up? What's the next round of projects? How do we capture lessons learned and so forth? And obviously, it's a big change effort, so it needs to be support from that perspective. And it also needs some measurement and impact tracking against this, right? But what we don't want to end up is we redesigned the process, but now the performance is worse than we had before, right? That's not a good sign. So that's a high-level implementation roadmap. I want to take you through a case study just to make this a little bit more concrete. And this is an example from a specialty pharmacy, right? So if you're a hemophiliac, and you need factor, right, factor 5, and that needs to be infused, and you need a nurse there, right? So that's the kind of environment we're talking about, right? So when people get a prescription, they get diagnosed as a hemophiliac, for example, then, right, they get to call a specialty pharmacy. And, right, these people have an onboarding process, right? And we looked at this, and it was a very complex process, right? It was like 49 steps, required a lot of handoffs, right? You see like the process map there. It took 9 days from start to finish. Right. So again, it's like, right, the process people that we are, we say, well, this is a fantastic opportunity. Right. So we looked at this and, you know, again, right, roles were consolidated, right? Can we bring this down to like a smaller number of people instead of like, you know, the 9 or 10 people that were involved? Can we put people, right? Can we get people to sit together So we eliminate the handoffs, and so we create a cross-functional part. We create a single point of contact, right? So there's one way in, and people own like that patient experience from start to finish. And so you see the new process map, right? That's a lot shorter, right? And also has less swim lanes involved, right? And then again, it's like from a results perspective, right? This was obviously like a lot simpler, right? 28 steps instead of 49. Only one handoff, right? Less printing and checking, right? Really minimize the point of contact with the patient. And it dramatically improved the conversion rate. So they could actually turn around these cases in the same day, which is really, really important, right? Because these are really expensive drugs. And if people, right, sit there and say on day 10, I haven't heard anything from specialty pharmacy X, right? Maybe I should take my prescription somewhere else, right? So again, it's like here's like the solution was, right, to create like a cross-skilled, multifunctional team that would take accountability from start to finish. There's a second example. This is a regional bank. This is a process called the letter of credit. And in this case, right, similarly, right, I created one-stop processing. It reduced the staff by a third, right? So now you need a lot less people doing this. They managed this through attrition. One also has to say that the people, right, that stayed, the other 67%, actually got more money, right, because they did more of the work, right? I think that's important to point out. Volumes went up, it tripled, span of control increased, right, and it delivers some savings, right? So again, this technology has been around for a number of years, right? A lot of companies, especially in the financial services space, implemented this in the 1980s and 1990s. What happened then, which I think is really interesting, is that then business process reengineering emerged, and companies got really interested in using technology to drive productivity gains. And so they decided not to deal with the human aspects anymore and really double down on the technology piece. But now here we are, right, 30 years later, and we realize that not only has it not delivered the productivity increases that we're looking for, but it also really destroyed the workplace. And so now you see, I think, more companies being interested and going back to these, right, to these findings and say, well, gee, maybe we need to restructure the work. So one question that always comes up is how much empowerment do you actually need, right? Because that's like where leaders get nervous, right? And so I think one way just like look at the space is to say, well, it's like, you know, what's fit for purpose when we look at strategy, right? If we're high cost, high volume, low cost, transactional, the technology really limits what we can do. It's a very stable business. And you know, we think that people are really, you know, right, we really got to control them tightly, otherwise they're going to mess up. Right? Creating a fully empowered team is probably a really bad idea. Right? That's going to be an organization that's going to be manager-led. Right? On the other side, if you're in a very it's like people-centric business, and the customer relationship is long-term, and the technology enables empowerment, and the context changes all the time. So odds are that we're going to have to constantly tweak and reinvent ourselves. And we think that people actually show up for work because they want to contribute to something bigger than themselves, then you might want to be more on the self-managing, self-directing side. Right? So again, this needs to fit with your business model. And if you look at this and say, gee, you know, we are like more on the self-managing side, right? We need to drive more decision-making down. Again, right, that has consequences, right? That means that, you know, when it comes to, for example, the role of the workforce, right, that the performance management probably needs to be shared, right? That the work design is based on the team, that we're going to reduce the layers, that we're going to create direct customer contact, and that we need to change the reward system accordingly so that the rewards are really tied to the team results, right? So this, again, is not something, I think if we're just moving like the process boxes around, I think we're not really getting at the full power of work design. So when should you consider this? I think there's like two scenarios. One is you're seeing it's like the doctor, like you go into the doctor and the doctor says, what's going on? You're sitting and your systems are, gee, doctor, I got low engagement, turnover is through the roof, the best people are going out the door. Accountabilities are really confused when something goes wrong, right? I can never figure out what happened. And the customers just complain constantly and our turnover is through the roof. And we're losing market share, right? And this is probably something where, you might want to take a real hard look at work design. But you also might want to take a look at this if you're changing how the work gets done. You redesign the business process, right? Why don't we incorporate this perspective around what makes a good job into the design of the new process to make sure we don't accidentally make the process worse? And I've been actually guilty of that, I think. So I throughout my Lean Six Sigma days many times, right? When you created these process management charts, you define everything down to the nth degree, right? We oftentimes kind of like really took all the decision making and autonomy out of the work, quite frankly. Or at least I've done that, right? I hope you all have been better. So you redesign the process, or you automate a part of the process, or you outsource part of the work, right? How do we make sure that what's left over is actually a good job? You introduce a new system, right? Again, another opportunity, I think, to rethink how work gets done. You restructure, you integrate an acquisition. These are all, I think, really important trigger points where you say, we're going to touch work anyway, right? Again, at the minimum, let's not make sure we make the jobs worse, right? Or ideally, right, let's seize this opportunity to design, right, a work product that people want to buy, right? A job that people want to hold. So we're kind of getting to the end of it, and then I think we're going to get into the questions, right? But so a couple of questions you might want to consider to figure out whether this is for you. One, is the work really fragmented today, right? How many people does it take to hire a new employee, right? If it's like in the double digits, right, this might be an opportunity. It is important to improve the customer experience. Do you need more agility and adaptability in the organization, right? Are you currently stuck in this mode where, right, we're making a change, right? It takes 6 months of study, right? 6 months of design work, and then maybe it gets implemented. Do we need something that's more agile? Are we concerned about employee engagement, right? And people got, right, the Gallup surveys, and your organization probably has some data, right? So if you're a typical company with a third of the employees engaged, this might be something, right, you want to look at. Turnover and talent retention, if that's a topic. If it's impossible to figure out where a process broke down, this might be something to consider. When people don't know what they own, when people don't have the authority to resolve issues or improve workflows. The last question, honestly, is the most important one, which is, does the senior leadership believe that most employees want to do a good job, right, seek responsibility, and can be self-directed? If the answer to that question is no, right, quite frankly, don't bother with it, right? Really, right? Then you're better off, I think, with like a more traditional approach, right? Because this becomes really, really difficult if the leadership mindset is not on the same page. And, from a sustainability perspective, right, I think there's like, right, 3 elements that I think, right, make in my view, make a change effort like this sustainable, right? One is goal alignment, right? We got to make sure we don't work, right, at odds with each other. So it's really about, right, getting the KPIs that drive the right behavior and aligning also the goals and objectives with these new ways of working, right? Let's make sure we don't create a conflict. Secondly, I think continuous improvement, right? So we need to have some end-to-end process measurement in place that allows us to see how we're doing. And also we need to have some cross-functional solutioning enabled, right, by a central team. Right, so this can't be done like in little functional silos, or it can be done, but it's a lot less effective. And lastly, employee engagement, right? How do we maximize ownership? How do we create the capabilities that people need? And how do we design good jobs? Critical success factors. One is to make it a win-win-win for everybody, right? For the organization, but also for the employee, for the customer. Secondly, I think it's really important to have a clear vision that everybody buys in as like what we want this future organization to look like. Third piece is be highly participative, right? So all levels got to be involved. This is also not something you can delegate, right, to the 5 people at the shop floor, right? Everybody plays a role here. The senior leadership to set direction, the middle management to create the design space, the employees to really seize the space and develop the solutions. And it has like this top-down, bottom-up element, right? Bottom-up, here's what we need to do a good job. Top-down, right, here's from a strategy perspective, right, what this needs to be delivered. it needs to be driven by business objectives, right? This is, again, not like a scheme to like, improve employee satisfaction in itself, right? It needs to be a business initiative. And again, it's like, right, with everything, right, you need to have good communications, right? It needs to be well orchestrated. If people get confused, if people get scared, if people, right, don't know what's going on, this can go off the rails, right? And I think I touched on this earlier. You got to align that with the performance and the reward system. So this idea of like, hey, we're going to take somebody who's like had a nonsense job, and now we're going to give them a ton of responsibility, and we're still going to pay them $15.95 an hour, is, I think, not viable, right? And so I think, again, right, people should get paid for the work that they're doing. And oftentimes, right, as you redesign the work, this work becomes a lot more productive. So those productivity gains, I think, need to be shared. So that's what I have. So I'm really curious about the questions. I have not been tracking the chat, but I think we're going to get to that. But in terms of additional resource, I want to point you to a few things. One is we got a newsletter, right? It's going to become more active in the next coming weeks. But there's, I think, where you can find some more thinking around like, what people can do to make work better. We also have a podcast called Work Matters, and I think, right, Elizabeth has been on it. And so I think that's also where we talk to, right, other folks that have really good ideas around how to make work better. You can try this diagnostic that I mentioned. We have a downscaled version of it at mymojo.works that you can use to actually see how well designed your own job is. Or you could ask people on your team to say, hey, take a quick version of this. Let's see if there's something here. And obviously, if you want to run this for your organization, feel free to reach out. We're happy to set that up. And then lastly, there's the book, right? So Fixing Work is coming out September 12th. And that really, I think, is it's a business fable, right? So it tells the story of a typical middle manager in a typical company that really discovers and applies these principles to address his specific challenges, which is high turnover, low productivity, customers are not happy, employees are frustrated, and really manages to get to the triple win. And I think this is like, if you ever read like a business fable, right? Gold Rat's the goal, or Who Moved My Cheese, right? So it's in that vein. But I think the idea is really to paint a realistic picture of like what this work actually looks like. To both, I think, show people the past, but also, quite frankly, be realistic about the obstacles, right? So this is, right, like everything in life, right? It's never a straight line between A and B, right? Change is hard. There are people that have a lot to lose from changing the status quo, right? Power, authority, importance, right? So I think one should approach this, I think, with like a, clear view around like what the challenges are. But I hope that what people take away from this, and also from reading the book, is that the opportunity is just too big to pass on, right? If you think about like the hidden cost of like, right, 30% engagement and 30% turnover, it doesn't show up in the P&L and balance sheet because it's hidden, but it's an enormous number. I would say any organization has like 30% engagement and 30% turnover. It's at least right 20% margin improvement opportunity. I bet some money on that. Right? So again, these are some resources that you can tap into if this topic is of interest. And for anything else, feel free to reach out to me. I'd also be happy to spend half an hour with anybody who says that's an interesting topic. Right? I'd love to have a chat and just see how that applies in my organization. So if you'd like to take advantage of that office hour, shoot me an email and we'll find some time to do that. That's all I have, Elizabeth.
That's very generous. That's very generous. I highly recommend anyone interested to take Thomas up on a little free chat, because obviously he's got deep knowledge and experience on this. There is a question, Thomas, from Terry. He's asking, is there a guide for redesigning work, implementing those 7 steps, when you have only a few days? Like, for example, in a Kaizen event where you want to walk out with a new process supported by redesigned roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, I think there is. I think actually the the book actually, I think, maps that out, I think, very, very clearly. And in the appendix, it also, I think it has like a roadmap for doing that. And Terry, if you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to send you that. The only caveat here is, right, I think this is, I think, difficult to actually fully implement over the course of like a 1 or 2 day Kaizen event. I think you can like do the design work, right? I think in that format, but I think the reality is, right, you're changing people's jobs. They're going to need some training. So I think this is, right, as much as it would be, as great as it would be to do this in a day or two, I think it oftentimes requires a bit more time, right? It's right. Again, you're messing with people's jobs, right? People's identity is tied up in that too, right? So I think I don't think it's fair to expect people to kind of like jump into that then, right, and completely redesign that in a day or two. I think it requires a little bit more time. But yeah, I think over the course of a week with some preparation, some follow-up, I think you can get a lot of this work done.
That's helpful. I hope that's helpful, Terry. And I have a question. So this is one of the things that kind of you're great with analogies. Most of them hilarious, Thomas. But the one that really stuck with me is, that this idea of whether you did it consciously or organically, the job got designed. The process and the output is that workers' experience of that job, but that we treat them like they're, they're renting it, right? So once you do this, now you have taken their input, you have treated it like not any process redesign, but a process redesign, right? How does this thing work? And then I think about, continuous improvement. And I realize sometimes you might be engaged, do this initial effort, help them, and then, move on and not see what happens after, like a lot of us do when we're consulting. But do you get the sense that, or have you experienced that workers then are allowed to do some tweaking, continuous improvement on the nature of the job? Like, does that sort of stay as a mindset?
It does, right? I mean, again, right, it's not like an absolute statement, right? Because, right, some companies just say, okay, we've done this exercise, right? So like it's the old change paradigm, right? Unfreeze, change, and then freeze it again, right? So we've done a little bout of like employee involvement, right? And now we've done that, right? So now we're going back to, it's like the old way of running things, right? And I think, again, that's like erodes over time, right? Because I think every single organization that I've worked with in the last 4 or 5 years, right, you really see that need for this ongoing improvement. Right, the technology moves so fast. Yeah. Right now, we got to deal with ChatGPT. How are we going to bring that in? And again, these top-down, right, management, right, until management realizes there's a problem, and then until management figures out what the solution looks like, and until, right, we hired the consultant, right, and rolled it out. We're like 18 months later, 24 months later, right? And then, right, then you start the next cycle, right? Yeah. So I think you've really got to, I think, quite frankly, I think this is like the missing ingredient in continuous improvement. I have been, the OpEx person for like a really long time, and I honestly have not seen an awful lot of continuous improvement going on. Right? We're like this episodic, we're doing a project, we're doing effort, now we're done. Right? I think this really, helps you to get over that bridge. Because if you were involved in the design, and not just in the design, but now you also have accountability for running it. Yeah. That's a little bit like your little mini business, right? I think a radical example is the company Haier, big Chinese white goods manufacturer that actually acquired GE appliances. And their thing is micro enterprises, right? They break the whole organization down into, right, 15, 20, 25 people businesses, right? And they have autonomy. They can, right? They can find their own customers. They can, right, find their own suppliers. They operate like on a common platform, and that's, I think, like taking this model to the extreme, right? Where people really, I think, have that ownership, right? And can be very adaptive, right, and responsive. But yeah, I think, again, it's like nobody washes a rental car, right? If you want continuous improvement, you got to involve people there, and then you can't take it away either. You can't say thank you so much, right? Now we're going back to the old ways of doing things.
I'm never going to get over that nobody washes a rental car. Okay, so Laura Lynn has a question, and Alyssa also wants to hear your thoughts on this. She says, what's your advice when you know your department is in dire need of a work redesign, but the leadership are not focused on the details of administration and instead are focused on higher level initiatives? And they really view administrative issues as individual worker/person issues, kind of, it's the person, not the process.
Yeah. So I mean, right, one is you can try to intellectually convince them, right? And I think the way I look at this is kind of like, well, when you hired the person, right, did you think that they were useless and just not up to the task? No, of course not, right? So how come that now kind of like everything is their fault, right? There must be clearly something wrong with our hiring process. I found that argument actually works. Intellectual arguments don't really work well, right? I think what works well is putting the leadership into an actual experience. And right, Elizabeth, right, you and I we're both huge fans of process improvement simulations, right? We've done plenty of move-its in our days, and so I use it's like a pizza simulation, right? A pizza shop experience where you give people different jobs. It's a highly it's very rigid work design. Right, the boss tells people what to do. Right, there's no autonomy at the bottom, and then you play out around like that, and you look at the performance, and then you introduce these ideas, introduce these concepts, get people to redesign the work, redesign the roles, and then you run the second round, and all of a sudden, performance goes up, people feel engaged, people feel committed to the organization, and then you can have once they had such that emotional actual experience, then I think it's much easier to say, okay, right, so if we kind of like look at how we structured the work here, do we think, right, that there's an opportunity? And even granted, there might be, one or two employees that maybe are not good employees, right, but it can't be everybody, right? If everybody is like a bad employee, then clearly we messed something up. And again, it's like people don't make these decisions intentional. Nobody gets trained on this, right? You can't blame the managers. They didn't know. Right? They had like, hey, there's extra work coming in. Let me hire another person. Let's give them all the crap. Right? And then that person, right? There's even more work, hires another person to give the crap that they don't like. Right. So I think this is like a natural tendency, right? We really rarely stop and step back and say, what did we build here? Right. And why has it become so complex? In a startup, for example, right? Everybody is clear what the mission is, right? People have this clear line of sight. As we grow, we kind of destroy that by breaking it down in little bits and bobs and directing functional boundaries and having managers that need to tell people what to do and when to do it. So I think this is like a little bit like, let's go back to the basics, right? Let's go back to, right? And you know that all from your own experience, if you do the whole job from start to finish, right, then you feel satisfaction, the job well done. So you have a detect, right? You know that you did something good. If you just do a tiny piece, you don't know what happens before and afterwards. Gee, it's like, right, how committed are you going to be, right, to the organization or to the work product?
I got an idea, Laurelyn and Alyssa. I think you need to buy Thomas's book for these leaders. That's great discussion.
And I'd be happy to do a book club session with them too.
Ooh, book club session.
I think that would be fun.
Yeah. And yeah, this recording will be up Monday, so you can share this broadly with folks, because Thomas is good at building an argument and showing you the way. So I appreciate that.
I hope it's also useful, I think, quite frankly, right, for the Lean Six Sigma practitioners, because that's not really something that shows up anywhere in the curriculum, right? Yeah. We take the process, we look at, we all look at the process, right? But again, we need people to perform that process. And we have this choice. Could one person do the whole thing? Maybe. Oh, wouldn't that be, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Could we have a small team that really, sits together and owns it, right? But if we, again, it's like have a very fragmented piece, I think the process improvements don't take us that far. And we've all seen that, right? We eliminate a few steps and we declare victory, and we say a successful business case here. But the reality is that oftentimes you really don't see the improved performance.
Yeah, no, we don't. Oh man, you're getting a lot of thanks in here. You got a lot of people excited about the book club. So Thomas, I think you're going to get some follow-ups here with folks pulling you in for a more discussion, and lots of thank yous for the enlightening discussion. This was great. So appreciate, Thomas. Thank you so much for coming to the cafe. And everybody, I'll keep you posted. You'll get an email with a link to the recording. And Thomas, you'll have to come back to the cafe.
Okay. I come with the next book. I come with the next book.
Yeah, okay, good. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming. Great to have you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.